Chapter 12. The bank opened at 8 a.m, and Walker was there at 5:02. He leaned his back against the cool glass doors and sipped coffee. It had been a useful evening, but he was paying the price. His head hurt, and the aniseed that pressed on his stomach periodically jumped into his mouth. He didn't know for sure if Michael had borrowed the $40,000 from this Baba, but he knew there would at least be a connection to the man that Isaias had described. He thought back to the office at the rear of the carpet shop, the door with its peephole placed halfway up. The perfect height for a child, or someone who couldn't stand. The coffee was sour, but Walker needed it. He had an idea now, an understanding of the type of people Michael had been dealing with. Serious, established, once powerful, but now past their prime. In his experience, any background information you can gather on the people you come up against helps. It takes away the mystery, gives shape to the spectre, reminds you that they're just flesh and blood. Walker flicked the empty coffee cup into a nearby bin as the Raki repeated on him once more. He ran a thumb over the smooth edge of his mobile and thought again about calling Smarts. No. Let the day play out. Let Michael do his thing in the casino, and then we'll see where the land lies. The bank door released silently at exactly 8 a.m. Walker had been inside once, 4 years ago, to set up the account. Nothing had changed. The ceilings were still high, the marble still shiny. A bank of cashier desks were positioned directly opposite the door, and the sound of Walker's footsteps echoed off the architecture as he approached the only open window. "I'm here to make a withdrawal. I called yesterday." The teller was an attractive blonde. She looked like the type that could speak 5 languages and free climb Everest. "Your name, sir?" "Walker." "Do you have your identification?" Walker reached into the black leather holdall he was carrying and pulled out his documents. The teller nodded and headed through a door that didn't need to say private, but did anyway. She wore a tight pencil skirt, and Walker's hungover horniness watched her leave. He gratefully leaned an elbow on the desk and opened his body out to the room, catching a blurred reflection of himself in one of the buffed-up pillars. He'd attempted to dress suitably for a day of visiting banks and casinos, tried to smooth out his rough edges with suit trousers and a collar. It hadn't worked. He looked like he was due in court, and not for anything good. The teller returned, placing Walker's documents in the security tray. "How much are you wanting to withdraw today, Mr. Walker?" "All of it." The teller didn't reply, she just tapped some keys. "That's £48,365.42. His life savings, accumulated over time through hard work and pain. It wasn't much to some, but it was everything to him. When Walker had first turned pro, his priority wasn't saving, it was survival. To afford the rent on his Bermondsey bedsit, he laboured on building sites for tradesmen friends, squeezing in his boxing training before and after work. A typical day back then would involve a pre-dawn, sub-40, 10-kilometre run, followed by 9 hours of intense physical labour, succeeded by 3 hours of pad hitting and sparring. He was dirt poor and slept like a baby. After winning his first 5 fights, the purses started to grow, allowing him to quit his day job and really concentrate on getting hurt for a living. From then on, with each fight he had, whether it was on the undercard at the O2 or a leisure centre outside Swindon, Walker would put £1,000 away. £1,000 hard-earned through blood-soaked, broken-boned, concussion-filled nights. The teller returned with a tall, slender man in a pinstripe suit. They spoke quickly to one another in French. The bald man hissed at the teller, and she grew quiet. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." The man had the air of a hotel concierge. "I believe you spoke to my colleague on the phone yesterday." "That's right." "Yes. I'm afraid there's a problem." Walker waited. "We need 24 hours' notice for a withdrawal of this size, not 12. Walker waited. The Scandi teller turned red and found something incredibly interesting to look at on her desk. "Mr. Walker?" The manager's plucked eyebrows were raised expectantly. Walker studied the man. He had a long neck. Walker felt like squeezing it. "Do you not have the cash here?" The man visibly bristled. "Of course we do." "Then I'll take it." "Mr. Walker, I'm afraid that's not possible." "That wasn't what your colleague told me on the phone yesterday." "Ah, yes. Well, she was mistaken." The teller looked like she'd found something really interesting on her desk. 2 bright crimson circles had appeared on her cheeks. Walker felt for her. "Well, how much can I withdraw today?" "If you give 12 hours notice, like you yourself has done, the maximum amount you can withdraw is £8,000. I wasn't going to cut it. Michael somehow had to turn this money into 160k. £8,000 might as well be 80. Walker frowned. "Why?" "I'm sorry?" "Why?" "It's our policy, Mr. Walker, for security reasons." "Whose security?" "Yours, sir." He smiled. "We're looking after you, sir. After your interests, sir. Saving you from yourself." "Do you have a business card?" The man frowned, then fumbled in the inside pocket of his blazer. "Gualbert Chapdelaine." Walker read it aloud. "Can't be many of you about." The man coughed. Walker took out his mobile, tapped the screen a few times, then let out a low whistle. "You know, this LinkedIn thing really is incredible. Gualbert Chapdelaine. Home address, 5 Packington Street, London, N1 7UX. Walker dead-eyed the bank manager. "That's just round the corner from Angel Tube, ain't it?" Gualbert Chapdelaine's gullet rose, like a tsunami had washed through the bank. "Give me my fucking money, Gualbert." Walker had parked the transporter at the Barbican. He'd taken extra care on the drive into the city, looping back round Clapham Common twice to make sure he wasn't followed. After last night's incident with the electric car and the smiling man, Walker knew he had become a person of serious interest to the Turks. He wondered how much they knew. The thought made him check his shoulder. Nothing but city boys and big shiny buildings. As he strode along the pavements of the square mile, brushing the woolen suits of Savile Row with the shiny polyester of Oxford Street, Walker was uncomfortably aware of the black leather holdall that swung at his right knee. He was aware of its weight, aware that what gave it such weight was money. His money. 50,000, earned the hard way. He'd been a bagman before. He'd once carried £250,000 to the Bugatti dealership in Mayfair for an ageing rock star who didn't trust bank transfer or His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. But that was different. He hadn't suffered to get that cash. The holdall bounced off his knee, and he felt the stacks of cash tumble. It was all he had in the world, except for a few £100 in the current account and what was tied up in the house. Walker walked, but he wanted to run. Run right back to the beautiful blonde bank teller and tell her it was a mistake. Tell her, "Please, I didn't know what I was thinking. Would you for God's sake put all the money I own back in that big vault and let's forget I ever darkened your door." Walker stopped and turned to look back from whence he came. He hefted the holdall, felt more cash fall on top of itself like shoes in a dryer. Cheapside stretched ahead of him, men and women ready to start their working day, some in finance, others not. Pigeon shit hit a wall and splashed down onto the pavement. Walker kept on walking. He spun the van left off Leighton High Road, far east, out where Hitchcock came up. The tube had mosaics. He'd seen them as a child, inch-brick blondes with warped mouths that screamed as you alighted. He'd taken Michael's address last night. Surprised he'd moved out this way. Surprised he wasn't closer to where they came up. Maybe Michael knew people. The street was corrupted Edwardian. He slowed to spot the house numbers. Odds were left, evens right. As he crawled to a stop outside number 12, a small moped came from his rear, buzzing past him with the anger of a housebound wasp. It carried 2 people, including the driver. The passenger's legs were bowed to stop his trainers scraping the tarmac, and as they overtook, an outstretched thumb and forefinger pointed at Walker's cab, and fired off skin bullets. Walker killed the engine and surveyed Michael's place. The building had been chopped up. What was once a large house for few was now a small house for many. His patent black, funeral-use-only shoes didn't have much grip, so Walker held the railing tight as he slid carefully down the basement steps like a drunk coming in from an all-nighter. The hold-all full of cash didn't help his balance much either. He stopped dead on the bottom step. The door to Bryant's flat was open. It creaked gently in the breeze, tapping the food waste bin upturned under a rotten window. Walker edged himself quietly forward until he could hold the door open with his shoe. The bedsit yawned at him. There was a half-covered mattress, a plastic chair, and a TV that was deeper than it was wide, but no sign of Michael. Walker had to duck his head slightly to fit inside and immediately smelt damp. The mattress was pushed up tight against a wall that might have been white once, but now spores had turned it into a 6-inch Rorschach test that peeled the plaster and turned the pillow grey. The tiny kitchen on the right didn't have a kettle, and polystyrene cartons littered the floor, their insides red with sauce. A door at the back of the room stood shut. Holding the hold-all close to his body, Walker moved towards it, his breathing quicker than he would have preferred. He kept reminding himself the Turks needed Michael in one piece to get their money. Still, Walker didn't like it. He placed his hand on the bathroom doorknob, but as he did so his heart spiked and he jerked his head down sharply. The ceiling above him was low, and it shook with the sound of footsteps, their rumble coming through from the flat above that sat inches from his crown. "Fuck off," Walker said it loud and opened the door. The bathroom was empty, save for the woodlice in the tub. Walker dialed Michael's number. The mattress erupted in sound. Walker really didn't like it. The phone was tied up in the sheets. Along with the bookmaker's blue biro and a scrap of paper, it read, "Gone to catch a train. Sorry." Walker took the steps out of the basement, 2 at a time. He reached ground level to see a man dressed in black looking through the passenger window of the transporter. The moped from before was up on the pavement, with its rider sat on lookout, visor up. The two turned as they heard Walker's feet on the steps. The passenger was thin and tall and ugly. From the acne scars, Walker made him out to be barely legal. "Move." The boy sucked his teeth and smiled. The moped rider flicked the bike's stand out and came closer. "Any tools in the back, bruv? You got some DeWalt? Makita?" The passenger's eyes were bloodshot. They drifted lazily to Michael's front door, then to the bag in Walker's hand. Walker could see him putting 2 and 2 together and getting $50K. "What's in the bag?" With his free hand, Walker grabbed the boy by the face. With one sharp extension of his arm, he slammed the boy's head off the side panel of the van. The teen rebounded into Walker's palm like a basketball. He bounced his head again, harder. The kid hit the pavement. Walker trapped him by placing a funeral shoe on his throat. "Where's the nearest station?" The kid's legs writhed. He had both hands on Walker's foot, trying to stop 16 stone from crushing his larynx. He gargled. Keeping the kid pinned, Walker turned his attention to the boy in the helmet who had pulled a knife. It was the type you'd peel an apple with. The blade wobbled. "Nearest station." The knife wielder looked down at his friend. Walker stepped down harder. "It's Leytonstone, that way." "Not tube, trains." The kid looked like he was going to cry. The kid under Walker's shoe already was. "Wanstead Park? That way." The boy pointed with the knife. Walker took his foot from the throat, got in the van and drove. He picked up signs for the station fast. Swinging back onto Leighton High Road, he wondered how long Bryant had been gone. The dash clock read 8:50 a.m. Trains usually started running at 5 a.m. He could be in Yorkshire by now. Walker went through a set of lights that were on the red side of orange and heard a cyclist shout. Up ahead, a sign pointed right for the station, and he obeyed. Walker chucked the van lopsided into a space that said drop-off only. He ran for the station entrance and got to the ticket barriers before he swore and turned back. He'd left £50,000 on the passenger seat. Second time around, he vaulted the gates, hearing his shirt tear under an arm. A shout came, but he ignored it. If Michael got out of town, it was game over. They'd come for his kid, bleed his ex-wife dry. Walker couldn't let that happen. He shot out onto a platform that was frustratingly busy. The departure board above his head listed a St. Pancras train arriving in 10 minutes, northbound. That meant the opposite platform would be for trains heading into London. If Michael was running, Walker doubted he'd go south. Walker whipped his head from side to side, scanning the platform. Michael had had a brief spell at one of the Manchester clubs. Maybe he still knew people up there. "Oi!" The shout came from behind him. A small round man in a high-vis jacket was bustling towards him. Walker ignored him. He looked left, then went right. People didn't move aside as he passed amongst them. Instead, they swayed like trees in the wind, used to the buffeting nature of London transport. Most didn't even look up from their phones. Walker clocked their faces as he moved. He knew it was a lost cause, that Michael would more than likely be long gone, but he had to try. The man in the high vis was 20 metres back and talking into a radio. Walker ploughed on. He got within sight of the platform end. Ahead stood two people wrapped up in a lover's embrace, their backdrop a razor-wire fence that glinted in the sun. He wasn't here. Walker looked over the tram lines to the opposite platform, shielding his eyes with an American salute. The guard shouted again, and the lovers turned to look. Walker squinted at the southbound platform. Would-be passengers were scattered along it like crumbs left out for the pigeons. Mike. He was amongst them. Across the tracks, standing almost directly opposite Walker, his feet flirting with the studded flagstones of the platform edge. The fur-rimmed hood of his parka was all the way up, and he looked tall and delicate. "Mike!" Carter didn't react. His head was down, busy devouring his phone. He nodded along to some unheard beat. Walker looked back along his own platform, past the guard to the departure board. Platform 2, Charing Cross, 5 minutes. There was time. The footbridge to the other side was back towards the centre of the platform. "What do you think you're doing?" The guard had arrived, puffing like the Flying Scotsman. "I'm looking for someone. I'm not catching a train." "You still need to pay." The departure board had quickly jumped down to 4 minutes. "How much?" "What? How much is a ticket?" Walker about managed to not throw the man aside. "Well, it depends where—" Walker unzipped the holdall and took out a wad of £50 notes. He peeled one loose and thrust it into the guard's hand. "I can't take this. I'll come back for my change." Walker set off. It was about 50 metres to the bridge. As he passed under the departure board, the display flicked to 3 minutes. Time went fast at train stations. He broke into a run. People moved this time. They had no choice. Walker ran with anger. Michael was going to up and vanish like a fart in a gale, find somewhere to bury his head in the sand while this gang came after his family for the money. He made the bridge and took the steps 2 at a time as passengers pushed themselves flat to get out of his way. He reached the crest, and the autumn wind whipped through the tear in his shirt and made it billow out behind him like a parachute. He used his frustration at Michael to push through the drag. Used his frustration at himself for going along with Michael's plan, a plan which Michael now clearly had no faith in. Why had Walker agreed to it in the first place? They weren't kids anymore. Walker's shoes slapped against the asphalt, and he felt the stone bruise his soles. 20 years back, if Michael had asked Walker to jump, he wouldn't have even asked how high. He would have just flung himself into the air with all his might. But this was a different life. A lot of water had run under the bridge since then. The black and yellow lip of the bottom step made Walker lose his footing, and he was forced to grab the rail. He felt like a fool. There had to be an alternative. This wasn't Rain Man. Michael was no autistic savant. He was an addict on the lam. The departure board above his head read 2 minutes. Michael hadn't moved. He was still standing towards the end of the platform, opposite the lovers. Walker slowed to a half jog. There was time. He had made it. He passed amongst the waiting passengers and let his breathing settle, thinking about what tact he should use to convince his childhood friend to stay. Walker only had two: violence or the threat of violence. He decided to go with the latter. "Mike." Walker was 6 feet from his friend. Still, Michael didn't react, just moved his head along with a beat only he could hear, the fur halo of the coat fluttering in the breeze. Walker clamped his jaw tight. He got closer and reached out his hand, placing it firmly on Michael's arm, the one holding the phone. "Fuck's sake, Mike." Mike frowned and pulled his arm away sharply. Mike wasn't Mike. Walker felt a change in the air around him. The wind died, leaves settled. He released the stranger's arm, who said something that Walker didn't hear. His ears were ringing like he'd taken a left hook to the temple. The railway tracks below crackled with electricity, heralding the arrival of the 902 to St. Pancras. Walker looked over at the lovers. They held hands as they waited for the train, lifting their heads to watch its arrival. To their left, against the wire fence, Walker saw Michael. Small, shivering, tears running down his face. Walker's shout was drowned out by the screech of brakes and a low, terrible scream that built in pitch as Michael ran for the platform edge. He jumped. Michael seemed to hang in the air for an age before the nose of the train slapped his body down under the wheels.